Can you describe some of the scenes that went on outside of the preschool and how the children reacted to some of those scenes?
Well, again, they often didn't know those scenes. The scenes could be happening very close. I mean, for instance, before preschool, when Annalise was, my eldest daughter, was still, she was probably a year old, and one night my husband and I were in our apartment on Marcus Street, and we heard this loud explosion, and I just bathed her and just was putting her down for bed, and all the windows in our apartment shook. And we looked at each other, and at that time there were a lot of bombings, suicide bombings taking place in Jerusalem, and we heard the sirens start, and we looked at each other, and we didn't do a very smart thing from a parent's point of view, but we sort of, it was like we had this football, and I was like, no, you take her, and he said, no, you take her, and because we both knew we were in such, at that point, there were so many bombings that we were always on high alert, and we felt like, you know, an emergency worker, that you get the call and there's so much adrenaline involved in that situation that before we could think, we were just thinking, okay, we got to race to the scene. And now the scene happened to be literally 1 block down the street from us. It was a cafe called Moment Cafe, which was right catty corner to the Prime Minister's residence, and we didn't know when the explosion occurred that's where it was, but when we went outside we could see, and our neighbor who lived upstairs was the owner of that cafe, and he was running down the stairs, and I'll never forget the look on his face. Rose, who you just met, was living with us at the time, was living in Jerusalem at the time with us. She wasn't in our house, and she also was sort of used to these situations and called us immediately and made her way to the house, so she was there within minutes. And I remember Geraldo was in town doing a special that weekend, and I remember him interviewing me about what it was like, sort of living right next to where these bombings were happening, leaving your family, and putting your child to sleep, and hearing this explosion. That's when it really started to hit close to home, and there were enough moments like that there was another terrible bombing down at Cafe Hillel, which is another coffee house, I would say probably about 4 or 5 blocks from our house, that really shook me up. Some of the ones that hit in my neighborhood, those really affected me in a way, because there were moments where you thought, wait a minute, this is crazy. But we pushed through it, and the story was very important to us. We were very engaged and connected, and we felt like we had set up enough of protection for the kids. We felt the kids were protected in a way. Our lives were a little bit upside down, where we would have to leave the house sometimes in the middle of the night if something happened, but we had the support, thanks to Rose in particular. We couldn't have done it without a very trusted and loving babysitter who was sort of, I describe as the third leg of the stool, that kind of kept us grounded, and kept the children grounded. The children, I mean, you'll meet them if they come home from school. They're extremely grounded kids. I don't feel like they never felt that their world was insecure. In fact, ironically, when we got here to the States, my youngest daughter, Amelia, she was, I guess, 4.5, 5, and she started to understand and hear about 9/11. And she was walking with my husband one day at the park where my daughter was playing soccer, and she was asking just repeated questions about 9/11 and Bin Laden, and we want to answer these questions and be honest with her, but we don't want it to become an obsession. And so we were trying to be matter of fact about it. And she said, "Boy, Daddy, why did you bring us to this dangerous country? This is where 9/11 happened." And that to me said they didn't really realize the situation we were living in Israel. And my daughter Annalise used to play at the park with the son of the Washington Post correspondent at the time, and they used to play King and Queen of Gaza, because they thought Gaza sounded so exotic. And their parents were always heading off to Gaza, and once they were playing with their babysitters' telephones, their mobile phones, and we heard, they retold this to me, they said they overheard Annalise say to Benny, "There's been an explosion in Tel Aviv," and Benny answered, "Have you sent a photographer?" and both us and the parents of Benny thought, well, maybe we have been here too long if the children are role-playing these kind of really, we can laugh about it now, but there was nothing funny about it at the
So
time.
they grew up knowing no different.
I don't think at the age that they were at 4 or 5 that they didn't understand what was really going on. They might have role-played that, but they didn't really understand what that meant. And once we got here, and they're 6, 7 years old, and they start hearing about 9/11 at school, and you have anniversaries, and they see they have access to the internet, and they see video clips of these events. Don't forget, also in Jerusalem, they were watching basically Hebrew cartoons, and they weren't seeing the news in English, and we didn't have them. They weren't watching Hebrew news at night, where they would see what was happening in in the territories, or so they again didn't really. I felt like they were a bit oblivious.